Hello everyone, welcome to Mediverse, and today's topic of discussion is cardiac cycle, which is an important essay question in physiology. So what is cardiac cycle basically? Cardiac cycle, it is, so first of all, before going into the topic, we need to know the definition of each heading, right? So what is cardiac cycle? So it's basically defined as the succession of coordinated events taking place during each beat. So what do you mean by events? What are the events that are happening in the cardiac cycle? So first we'll be having the atrial events, okay? Then we'll be having the ventricular events. So in atrial events we have atrial systole followed by diastole. We'll discuss every event in detail, okay? So first, in the cardiac cycle, what do you mean by succession? That is nothing but after each event the other event takes place, and the events are simultaneous also. So the first event is atrial events, that is atrial systole and diastole. Then comes the ventricular events, ventricular systole and ventricular diastole. After ventricular events, again the atrial events are repeated. So there is succession of events taking place coordinatingly, right? They are coordinated events that are taking place continuously. That is why we call it a succession of coordinated events taking place during each beat, okay? All these events that are taking place during each beat, that's why there is a cycle that is repeated in every beat, right? So that is why we call it as cardiac cycle. So that is about the cardiac cycle. That is the definition of cardiac cycle. So we know very well that each heartbeat has two phases, right? One is the systole and another one is diastole. We know very well the basics of what is systole and what is diastole. So systole is nothing but heart contracts and pumps the blood through arteries. Nothing but contraction phase of heart is called a systole. Okay, that is given a separate name, that is called a systole. Whereas diastole is the phase when the heart is not pumping the blood. Heart is filling the blood. Heart is getting filled by the blood. That phase is called as diastole. Okay, we know that very well, what is systole and what is diastole. Now we'll talk about the events. What are the events in the cardiac cycle? We'll discuss every event in detail. So before going to events, we need to know the cycle, right? Roughly we need to have the idea of what are the cycles. So the first one is atrial systole. What we'll be having is atrial systole. Systole means contraction. Atria means, so atrial systole is nothing but contraction of atria, right? So that the duration of atrial systole is about 0.1 second, okay? The remaining rest of the events, that will be the atrial diastole. The atrial diastole will be around 0.7 seconds. So totally atrial systole and atrial diastole, it is around 0.8 seconds, okay? So atrial systole and atrial diastole, the duration of atrial systole and atrial diastole is about 0.8 second, where atrial systole contributes only about 0.1 second, okay? So this is the events occurring in the atria. Now what about the events that are occurring in the ventricle? So in ventricle also, same as that of atrial systole, we'll be having the ventricular systole. So in the ventricular systole, what will happen? There is contraction of ventricles, right? Simple. That is around 0.3 seconds. Whereas the ventricular diastole, it is around 0.5 seconds. So you can, by seeing the diagram, we can observe that atria and ventricle, both of them, they contract simultaneously, right? The events are occurring simultaneously. So first the atria will contract, then it will pump the blood to the ventricles, and then the ventricles will contract and they'll pump the blood to the pulmonary trunk and the arteries, okay? So these are the events that are occurring, which is depicted in the diagram. I hope you understood. So in the atrial events, what are we having in atrial events? Atrial systole and atrial diastole. Atrial systole is about 0.1 second, atrial diastole is about 0.7 second. Whereas in ventricles, we are having two phases, right? Ventricular systole and ventricular diastole. In ventricular systole, what do you mean by ventricular systole? Again, contraction of ventricles. It is around 0.3 second, whereas the ventricular diastole is around 0.5 second. Remember very well that diastole is for longer time because filling of the blood requires time, right? So in this phase, the atria or the ventricle, they do not pump the blood, they do not contract, they are filled with blood. that is called as diastole. Okay, so these are the events. So in ventricular systole, again we are having, again they are subdivided into mainly two events. What are those? Isovolumetric contraction and ejection phase. Whereas in the ventricular diastole, we are having total of 5 events. They are subdivided into 5 events for easier understanding. The diastole of ventricle is divided into 5 phases. What are those? Protodiastole, isovolumetric relaxation, rapid filling phase, slow filling phase. The last stage is last rapid filling phase. Okay, so we'll discuss each event in detail. Okay, so the first event that we'll be talking is about the atrial systole. So what happens in the atrial systole is very important. So it is also called as the last rapid filling phase. Okay, last rapid filling phase, or it is also called as pre-systole. Okay, last rapid filling phase or pre-systole. So in this atrial systole, what happens is the atria pumps the blood from the atria to the ventricles, right? So that is called as last rapid filling phase or pre-systole. Okay, only a small amount of blood is pumped into ventricles because most of the blood it is pumped during joint diastole. Okay, most of the blood is pumped in the joint diastole, hence only small amount of blood is pumped into the atrial systole. Okay, what is the amount of the blood? Only 10%. Okay, only 10% of the blood is pumped into the ventricles in this phase. That's why the clinical significance of this phase is that because small amount of the blood is pumped into the ventricles, even if atria stop working, even if the atria do not pump the blood, atria do not contract properly, there is no much difference in the person. So there are many people who suffer with the atrial fibrillation survive for several years without any difficulty in circulation. Why? Because it contributes only about 10%. If the contribution was more, the person would suffer from circulation insufficiency, right? But because there is no much contribution, so even if the person is suffering from atrial fibrillations where there is a decreased pumping ability of the atria, the person will survive. Okay, that is the clinical significance of atrial systole. Now, what are the pressure and the volume changes? So during the atrial systole, the intra-atrial pressure increases. That means the pressure inside the atria increases, and intraventricular pressure and the volume also increase, but slightly. Okay, majorly intra-atrial pressure will only increase, whereas the intraventricular pressure and the volume, they'll also increase, but not in major quantities. Okay, and what is the significance of this phase is that the fourth heart sound is heard during this phase. So for the heart sounds, you need to understand the entire cardiac cycle, then you'll be able to understand the pressure and the volume changes. Okay, so this is about the atrial systole. Now let us come to the atrial diastole. So in atrial events, we have mainly two events, right? Atrial systole and diastole. We have completed the systole. Now we are going to the diastole. In the atrial diastole, the duration of the atrial diastole is about 0.7 second. Okay. Now what happens in the atrial diastole? We know that very well. The diastole means the heart is not contracting. It is in relaxed state. That means it is filling the blood. So atria is getting filled with the blood. Okay. So long atrial diastole is required for filling of blood into atria. We know very well because diastole is usually longer than systole. Why? Because filling of the blood requires time. Okay, there is long atrial systole about 0.7 seconds. Okay, now right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from all over the body from superior and inferior vena cava. So if you take the structure of the heart, okay, I'm sorry, so this is superior vena cava, this is inferior vena cava. So if you roughly take the diagram of the heart, so this is the superior vena cava and this is the inferior vena cava. So this is the right atrium, right? So in the right atrium, there is opening superiorly for the superior vena cava, inferiorly there is opening for inferior vena cava. So these openings, they help in the getting of the blood from different parts of the body. Superior vena cava receives the blood from upper part of the body, whichever parts are present upside to the superior vena cava, that is the blood from the head and neck, okay, that is received to the right atria through superior vena cava. Whereas from the lower part of the body, that is abdomens and limbs, all the blood from the lower part of the body is received through right atrium through inferior vena cava, okay. So whatever blood right atrium receives, that is the deoxygenated blood. That means it has to be oxygenated, it has to be uh, pumped to lungs for oxygenation, okay. That is about the oxygenation process. So that is the openings of the right atrium. Whereas left atrium receives oxygenated blood from lungs through pulmonary veins. So after the blood reaches the lungs, then the lungs will okay, so the lungs, they'll carry out the oxygenation process. That means that they increase the oxygen content in the blood, and they'll again, so this pulmonary veins, they open into left atrium, right? Left, the four pulmonary veins, they open into the left atrium. So this helps in the getting of the blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So the oxygenated blood is received through pulmonary veins from the lungs to the left atrium, okay. So that happens, these two events mainly occur in the atrial diastole. I hope it's clear. Okay, now we'll talk about the ventricular events. So in the ventricular events, we'll be having majorly, they are subdivided into two events, okay, in the ventricular systole. So what are those two events occurring in the ventricular systole? The first event is isovolumetric contraction, and the second event is ejection period, okay. These are the two events which are very important in the ventricular systole. So what happens in the isovolumetric contraction? So it is the first event of ventricular systole. So in the ventricular systole, what happens is before the ventricular contraction, in the ventricular contraction, what is the type of ventricular contraction that we have to understand? So it is a type of contraction where there is increase in the tension of the in the ventricular musculature, okay, without change in the length of the muscle fiber. So suppose this is the ventricle, okay. Let us take the rough diagram of the ventricle. So in the ventricles, there is increase in the tension, but the length of the ventricular musculature is same, okay. So this type of contraction is called as isovolumetric contractions. So in physiology, you'll be having two types of contraction: isovolumetric contraction, isotonic contraction. We'll come across the isotonic contraction in the nerve muscle physiology. Isovolumetric contraction, it is seen in the ventricular systole. So first what happens is there is increase in the tension in the ventricular musculature, and that will lead without change in the length of muscle fiber. That is called as isovolumetric contraction. AV valves are closed due to increase in the ventricular pressure. So as the tension increases due to increased pressure and increased ventricular pressure and tension, the atrioventricular walls which are present in the pulmonary, sorry, not pulmonary, it is between the atria and the ventricles, will be having atrioventricular walls, which is bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve. So because of increased pressure in the ventricles, the AV valves are closed, okay. And that after the closure of AV valves, the semilunar valves that are present in the aorta and pulmonary artery, that is also, so the semilunar valves, after the closure of AV valves, semilunar valves are also closed. So this will result in the contraction of ventricles. So for the ventricles to contract, first there should be isovolumetric contraction, then the closure of these two valves, followed by increase in the tension. We know that very well, okay. This is about the isovolumetric contraction, okay. Now in the isovolumetric contraction, there is what is the significance is that the first heart sound is heard in this phase due to the closure of AV valves. We know very well that AV valves close after the isovolumetric contraction. During the isovolumetric contraction, the AV valves are closed. So that will lead to the appearance of the first heart sound, okay. Now what is the significance of this phase is that increase in the ventricular pressure leads to opening of AV valves, leading to ejection of blood. Now what happens is, because of increase in the further pressure in the ventricles, that will lead to openings of AV valves. Okay, I'm sorry, it is not AV valves, it is semilunar valves. Okay, that will lead to the opening of semilunar valves, leading to the ejection of blood. So this is about the isovolumetric contraction. So if you observe this diagram, you can understand that the closure of mitral valve, and there is isovolumetric contraction. This phase is extending from the closure of the mitral valve to the opening of AV valve. Okay, that is what we have discussed. So in this phase, if you observe the line, it is in this phase, what is happening, the volume, the pressure is changing, the pressure is increasing from 50 to around 100 to 150, but the volume is constant, right? The volume is not changing. That is the significance of this phase. In this phase, it extends from B to C, and in this phase there is increase in the pressure. So that's why it is called as isovolumetric contraction. The volume is constant. Okay, the second phase in the ventricular systole is the ejection phase. So what happens in the ejection phase? There is rapid ejection followed by slow ejection. So again, the ejection phase is of subdivided into small phases, that is rapid ejection and slow ejection. So in the rapid ejection, the duration of rapid ejection is about 0.13 second. Okay, whereas the duration of slow ejection is around 0.09 second. So this rapid ejection period starts as soon as the semilunar valves are opened. Okay, here that is semilunar valves, not AV valves. Okay, so as soon as the semilunar valves open, maximum amount of the blood is pumped through the semilunar valves after the ventricular systole. Okay, that is called as rapid ejection phase. The duration is around 0.13 second, whereas the slow ejection phase is a phase where the blood is ejected, small amount of blood is ejected, and with little force, with a little less force. Okay, that is this that is about these two ejection phases that occur in the ejection period. So here in the diagram we can observe that ejection period is also extending between two phases where the aortic valve opens. So as soon as the aortic valve opens, the blood is ejected. Hence we can see the change in the volume. So the volume is changing from 150 to 50. Why? The volume decreases, right? Whenever the ventricles eject the blood, there is decrease in volume of ventricles. From C to E, if we observe that there is phase of ejection, C to D. Okay, this is called as the ejection phase. So in this phase the volume is decreasing. Now what are the events in the ventricular diastole? So what are the events? So mainly there are a few events that occur in the ventricular diastole. What are those? First event is protodiastole, then comes the isovolumetric relaxation, then comes the rapid filling phase, slow filling phase, and last rapid filling phase. Okay, in the ventricular diastole, what happens is, due to ejection of the blood into the aorta and pulmonary arteries, what happens is the pressure in the aorta and the pulmonary artery increases, whereas the pressure in the ventricles decreases. Why the pressure decreases? Is because the blood is pumped, ejected into the semilunar walls, the aorta and the pulmonary artery. So wherever the volume is more, the pressure will be more, right? So because the blood is ejected, the pressure decreases in the ventricles. Okay, now pressure decreases so much so that the further decrease in the pressure, that will lead to closure of semilunar walls. Okay, the semilunar walls which are present in the aorta, due to the closure of these walls, there is appearance of the second heart sound. So the first heart sound is lub, okay, with more intensity, whereas the second heart sound is dub with less intensity. Okay, this is about the significance of heart sounds. So the first heart sound, it is heard during isovolumetric contraction, whereas the second heart sound, it is heard during the ventricular diastole, the protodiastole of the ventricular diastole. So after the protodiastole, the second phase in the ventricular diastole is isovolumetric relaxation period. So it is completely opposite to the isovolumetric contraction. So in isovolumetric relaxation, there is muscular relaxation characterized by decrease in tension. So the same we have talked about the isovolumetric contraction. There is increase in tension in contraction, whereas in relaxation there is decrease in tension. This is decrease in tension without any change in the length of the muscle fiber. That is called as relaxation. isovolumetric relaxation. Okay, so in this phase all the walls of the heart are closed. Okay, whatever walls we are having, like mitral valve, tricuspid valve, okay, semilunar walls, aortic walls, all these walls are closed. So due to the closure of all these walls there is relaxation period, and after some time the atrioventricular walls opens due to decrease in the ventricular pressure. So because all the walls of all the chambers of the heart are in a relaxed state, there is further decrease in the pressure. So after there is further decrease in the ventricular pressure, the atrioventricular walls open. So whenever the pressure increases, just blindly remember that the valves are closed. Whenever the pressure decreases, the tension decreases, valves are opened. Okay, that is the characteristic feature of isovolumetric relaxation, that is opening of the AV valves. So what happens after the opening of AV valves, that we'll study in the filling phase, rapid filling phase, slow filling phase, and last rapid filling phase. Okay, these are the very small phases. So what happens in the rapid filling phase, the atrioventricular walls are opened, so the blood rushes from the atria to the ventricles. So in this phase only 70% of the blood is filled. Okay, so that is about the rapid filling phase. Now what is the importance of this phase is that due to the opening of AV valves there is appearance of third heart sound. So basically there are four heart sounds that are heard in the cardiac cycle. Okay, first heart sound that is heard during the isovolumetric contraction, the second heart sound during the protodiastole, the third heart sound is heard during the rapid filling phase, and the fourth heart sound we have already discussed, that is in the atrial systole. Okay, that is about the heart sounds. So this is the significance of rapid filling phase. Now what happens in the slow filling phase? 20% of the blood only, so maximum 70% of the blood is pumped in the rapid filling phase. So the rest of the 20%, okay, 20% of the blood it is pumped in this phase. Okay, and the ventricular filling slows because the volume, the most of the blood it is pumped in the rapid filling phase only, so the ventricular filling slows down. So what is the last rapid filling phase? Occurs in the atrial systole. If you remember, in the atrial systole we have discussed that the atrial systole is also called as last rapid filling phase, where only 10% of the blood pumps from the atria to the ventricles. So that is about the last rapid filling phase. So if you see the diagram, in the isovolumetric relaxation there is decrease in the pressure, so there is change in the pressure but the volume is constant. So isovolumetric relaxation means volume, isovolume, that indicates the volume will be constant. Relaxation means the pressure decreases, contraction means the pressure increases. Okay, this is the period of filling. In this phase the volume increases. Okay, this is all about the diagram that we have discussed already. I hope you understood the class, and thank you for the video. Thank you for watching my video.